Well, probably got a little bit excited about it there, actually, and hopefully, in the meanwhile, you guys have got a few ideas about some questions you might like to ask of our speakers today. And this is an opportunity. If things are sort of been rattling around your heads about what's been said, certainly I actually have to say that it seems quite daunting, the prospects of what we have to do as an international community. So I think we haven't actually got everybody sitting up here, so I don't know how we're going to manage that. But has anyone got a very interesting question they'd like to ask? And then somehow we'll handle it. There's a gentleman over there that's got a question.
Hi, Peter. Listening to the first two presentations, it's very clear that the challenge that as the world we have, in the world that we have, to act quite urgently. And listening to the latter presentations where you see the tools to do so, my concern is, I think Jonathan mentioned that we need to act within 5 years. How do you get this across to the people that actually make the decision to go ahead with carbon balanced, recycled product?
Well, I think we're just offering, I suppose, an opportunity to do something about it, and we have a few customers that actually are making those decisions. But I mean, I'm actually intrigued myself, because I think that we have got a situation where, whilst nations have signed this agreement, I think Jonathan mentioned very early on that only 10 countries have ratified it, so it's not actually in place. And I guess the issue is that we will be compelled ultimately. I guess we've signed up as Europe, but obviously that might change us in itself come June. So I don't know if Jonathan or Tom can actually perhaps answer that question.
Well, good question. What I didn't mention is that there is quite a lot of political will out there now to do more. Up until last year, I would have said, to be honest, that the weak link in the chain was a generation of political leaders that were frankly overwhelmed by this challenge, were full of concern about their vested interests, about the fossil fuel industries, were incapable of thinking their way through to an opportunity-driven set of solutions to decarbonizing the global economy, and were therefore a massive risk to the business community because they weren't actually moving in line with the science to bring forward elegant, proper, market-based solutions. And that's when politics fails us all, to be honest. Paris really did show that the politicians might actually get their heads around this at long last. What they've signed up to is quite ambitious. It does require significant change for almost all countries. You probably won't have picked this up yet, but some of the real leadership is coming from countries like China and elsewhere. China's always been a huge problem, but now China has fully understood that if it's going to allow its 1.3 billion people to prosper sustainably, it's got to have a low-carbon economy. It probably gets that better than most politicians in many Western countries, certainly, than is the case in America, where most politicians don't really get this at all, which is a bit of a problem. So my story is that politics is getting better. Business is way out ahead of the politicians, but business is asking for proper market-based solutions. In a market, one thing matters more than anything else: that the price that you pay for something accurately reflects its true cost. Markets don't work if price doesn't align with cost. So the thing we need most urgently is a price on a ton of carbon. And you saw that in Tom's presentation. You saw how the cost of things will increase, cost of energy, and on top of that, cost of carbon. I may disagree with Tom about cost of energy, because I actually think energy costs will come down over the next 30 years. But the cost of carbon will need to accelerate very fast. And I think the figure that you were looking at there, 40, 50 tons within 2030, I'll take a bet with any single person in this room, sort of daring thing to do. I'll be 80 by this time. But in 2030, I'll bet you the price of carbon is well north of $50 a tonne and might easily be closer to $100 a tonne. So start factoring that in, because this cost of carbon will eventually feed through onto the P&L. And as soon as it's on the P&L, guess what? Finance directors are going to say, oh, bloody hell, why didn't you tell me about this? We did tell you about this quite a long time ago. Now get on and implement. So it isn't there yet, but the political will is coming behind this now, because actually we can grow our economies without losing competitive positioning in the global economy and still do the right thing on carbon.
I don't know, is it Tom that wants to? Oh, sorry, it's Julian.
Yeah, I just thought I'd mention, about bringing these things together, which I think is, as you say, it's a really critical point. And it was part of the reason why WWF UK ran a forest campaign over the last 18 months, because we had various opportunities, for example, through the review of the European timber regulation, the fact that we see a lot of businesses investing in sustainability, but there's still lots of competitors who are not taking very much action, and also there's no incentives in the market. There's no reward for investing in sustainability, in any shape or form. So I think just from a UK perspective, I just wanted to add that what we try to do is say, get companies to join up with us and others to, address consumers, address each other, address the UK government, and in fact the European Commission and member state governments, and say, actually we're investing in this. We want this to happen. We want this market to be different. We don't want people trailing behind us when we're trying to make changes and benefiting from it. I mean, illegal logging depresses the global timber price. It makes it very hard to have an equitable market. And actually, if we've made all these commitments, how will we meet them unless more policy action, more consumer action is taken to bring these things together? So we try to use our UK campaign as a vehicle for convening people across different themes. So we've had meetings with DEFRA, we've had meetings with Rory Stewart. We've done reports on, as I mentioned, the implementation of the government's own mandatory procurement policy to see whether it's supporting the sustainability agenda. And we want to keep doing this, but with the voice of business to say, this is the way we want it to go. We believe in it, and by building confidence, we feel in the business community that then people are not alone in doing this, and therefore we should be exposing the others who aren't taking action. That's I think the way we will continue to try to bring those agendas together.
Thank you, Julia. I think Tom also wants to.
Yeah, just to respond kind of directly, I think a lot of action in this area is often really difficult, and most businesses are trying to do as much as they can on their own direct emissions and the things that they can directly control. So one of the advantages you've got, if you're coming with a proposition like we've been talking about today, is you're making it easier for them, because you can help them along that journey without actually them having to do a lot of additional investment or a lot of different work. So you're offering a solution that is just off the shelf, and it just takes them forwards. So I think that's one of the USPs that you've got here. And actually, this is a good example of what I was talking about earlier about working with suppliers to actually drive transformation. And I think it's a great thing that you're moving this forward. And I think that's the kind of the angle that I'll be approaching with engagement in terms of speaking to businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're really saying is that it's going to come legislation. It's going to be coming down the track, and really companies need to kind of get ahead of the game if they can, because it will be in their own interests. I've got another question here.
Yeah, well, that's loud. Wow. Yes, I was just wondering what the panel felt. One of the things that Julia mentioned was about this kind of incentivising businesses to do this, but I was just wondering whether or not businesses, from the panel's perspective, could look at something similar to what's happened with the likes of Starbucks with their non-paying their taxes. It's almost like shaming these organisations that don't take this seriously at this point, whether or not what their thoughts are on that, really. I don't know who'd like to answer that.
Yes, that's an interesting one. Shaming? Jonathan also.
I'll just start very quickly just to say that we did a little bit of work looking into incentives, and we started off, I think, with about 50 odd different incentives which we debated the pros and cons of, and including sort of taxes and rebates and all sorts of things. And I think that the difficulty is finding incentives which work well in the market but don't exclude actors and don't contravene, market rules, etc. But we felt that probably, well, certainly for timber products, one of the best places to start was by really trying to enable basically public sector procurement to be better. That's a way that, for example, you could have government doing much more to reward businesses who are able to demonstrate sustainability criteria as they bid for government work and tenders. And we feel that's quite underused, but potentially an easy way of leveraging the power of the public purse, in favour of sustainability. But there's other things like, better favourable finance. And we talked about also, whether there should be more done on sort of mandatory transparency in terms of, what are people's impact or product impact. So we have looked a bit into that, and that is online, which I can share the link later for people to circulate around. But I do think this is an area we need to be asking the question, why is there no barrier to products that are harming the things we're trying to address and we've made commitments to, and no reward really for businesses who are investing in that? And that's something I wonder why, the sort of sustainable business community doesn't get more involved in asking that question themselves and then bringing it to, policymakers.
Did Jonathan... Oh, sorry. Got another question, I think. So let's go to another question.
Evening, everybody. I'd like to ask Jonathan a question regarding the emerging countries that we have in the world using the cheap carbon that they can use to grow their economies. Are we, as the Western world, very wealthy, looking at new, greener options for energy? Are we going to have to incentivize them not to use carbon as a long-term venture? They look at it because it's cheap. We seem to have enjoyed the good times with carbon, burning coal, etc., to get where we are in the world. They haven't, and now they are. Are we going to have to do something about it?
Thanks. The great thing that's happening is that the price of renewable energy technologies continues to come down all the time. And in quite a lot of countries now, particularly interestingly in South America, which has pioneered this, governments have auctions where they basically say, we want 500 megawatts of power on the grid by 2018, 2019, and we will take the best bid that we can get from any supplier, usually big companies, but not necessarily. And what is beginning to happen now in these countries, where you have a much more open competition, is that renewable energy schemes are now outperforming even gas. So you're getting investment in renewables not because governments are trying to drive a lower carbon energy economy or because they're trying to get a better mix of the different types of energy in their portfolio, but because this is the lowest cost provider that any country can get. I can pretty much guarantee nobody in this room will know the answer to this, but one of the world's first 100% renewable energy countries is Uruguay. Okay, own up. You didn't know that, really, did you? So there's a story going on here, which is all about cost competitiveness in a marketplace that is suddenly waking up to the combination of renewables plus storage. You have to be able to store the stuff, plus efficiency. The best way to help all of these countries is to enable them to invest in efficiency. China is a very inefficient country. It needs 5 times as much energy to produce 1 ton of product as Japan. If we could make the Chinese economy as efficient as Japan, we'd save huge amounts of carbon. Of course, the Japanese wouldn't like it at all because it would mean much more competition. So it's one of those difficult things, but we can help them a lot, and we will see accelerated decarbonization even in those countries as costs continue to fall. China's already at peak coal. So we probably have seen the high point of coal burn in China, and from now on it'll come down every year. That's encouraging.
We just actually want to follow up on the sort of shaming of Starbucks type of... Jonathan was going to have a word about that.
Sorry, which one was that, Peter?
We're just talking about, companies being forced to go down a route.
I think legislation is increasingly impacting on business, that businesses now have to report on their carbon emissions. And that is going to increasingly impact on businesses and wanting to do the right thing. And there is legislation now which includes the carbon reduction commitment. That is organisations who use a certain amount of not fossil fuel, but a certain amount of energy have to actually report those emissions, and they appear in a league table. So in terms of shaming organisations into performing better, 2 things will happen in the boardrooms of corporate companies. Through having to mandatorily report on their emissions, they will be encouraged to reduce it because they realise that there is a cost. The other word to carbon and a high carbon footprint is cost, and businesses don't like cost, so businesses are going to want to become more energy and more carbon efficient. And also from a CSR perspective, wanting to demonstrate to consumers that they're doing the right thing, increasingly large organisations will be embarrassed and having to make deliberate and specific attempts to reduce their carbon emissions.
I mean, we're right in saying that it's going to start with the bigger companies, and then obviously there's going to be a trickle-down effect to the smaller companies. And I suppose they're intertwined in terms of servicing each other, and so we just better get going. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Sorry, are there any more questions at all? There's a young gentleman here with a question.
It's a long time since anybody called me that, but thank you for it, Peter. We all receive communication from particularly utility bills and people like that say, please sign up for paperless billing because it'll save the environment and it'll save the world. Does it?
I'm not going to answer that.
Sorry, I'll stand up because I'm quite short, or stand on the stage because I'm quite short. I have another job as well, which is I manage in the UK the 2 Sides and Print Power campaigns, and you're absolutely right. This is like a cancer to our industry. Organisations writing to consumers in their homes saying, please move to electronic billing and save a tree. Please move to email rather than tree mail. And one thing that these campaigns, which I'm not here about today, but 2 Sides do, is we write to these organisations and we say, you cannot say this. It isn't true. You don't have the evidence to support this, and you will remove it. And if they don't, we will take them to Advertising Standards Authority. Sometimes we're not very good at telling our own industry, the print industry, what we're doing, but we did a survey back in 2015 which showed out of the 83 large organisations we surveyed, 26 were making wrongful claims about benefits of moving to electronic media. And of all those organisations we wrote to, all but 2 have now removed those claims, and we are still working with those 2. And it includes HSBC Bank, who are removing their green account from the 1st of May, which tells people it's better for the environment by moving to electronic banking. So that activity is happening. We're just sometimes not very good at telling the industry about it. And if you do get any instances or you see this, please report it to us because we will take action on behalf of our industry. Okay.
I don't know if there are any other burning questions, but we're struggling on time now. So, yeah, absolutely, Julia.
I think the really important part about that is, which we see a lot of, people helping now with better print management, is are those organisations anyway using the paper that they do use in an effective way? And that's the most important question, I think, which is where, a lot of sort of leading printers, print management companies are trying to help people get better bang for their buck out of the paper that they do use. And that, I think, is a trend that we would like to see continuing.
One more off the road.
Hi there. I think, first of all, I think it's everybody's responsibility in the room to actually do something about carbon and about recycling. And I've got two questions, really. One for the two Jonathans, whoever wants to answer it. What's the difference between the Copenhagen Agreement of some years ago and this latest agreement? And the second question really is aimed at Julia. And this is something very close to my heart, having 4 children who always want to go to a KFC, a Burger King or a McDonald's, who extol the fact of recycled product and then spend all the time putting all of their carton recycled into landfill.
Ouch.
I'll start then. So I think on the food packaging, if that packaging can't be recovered, then we want to make sure that that packaging is recycled material before, it goes into its final use. And I'm not the expert, but I know there's lots of ins and outs about, hygiene and the recycled content and the reuse in packaging for food. So that is a big challenge. And I think, we, for example, work with McDonald's, and one of the conversations we're constantly having with them is how can they actually just move away from so much packaging, which is just one use and then gets disposed. So that I think is the focus that we would have on that. But it is definitely a big challenge, which, and just in packaging in general, what we find is, in a way, many people have dealt with other probably more conspicuous kind of forest-based products in one form or another, and packaging has almost been the last thing that people have come to in their agenda. So there's a hell of a lot more work going on in that arena now, I think, and we probably will see changes quite rapidly.
Thank you. Your problem starts with having 4 children, of course. That's the cheeky riposte I'm entitled to make as a patron of Population Matters. But anyway, I won't go any further down that line. On the story about Copenhagen and Paris, 6 years, a world of difference, literally a world of difference. Copenhagen was badged as a place where everything would be sorted out. It was called Copenhagen. It ended up in a complete failure, to be honest, and people in despair that we were never going to be able to do this. In the intervening 6 years, 2 things happened. One, the business community got stuck in. In Paris, the business community was a major supporter of the international agreement. They did not hold back. They were basically getting after governments to say, do it now. We need you to be clear about this. So business leadership was a critical part of the outcome from Paris. And the second thing, which was great, is that in Copenhagen, America and China were still hanging back. They were still playing silly buggers, to be honest, about blaming one and the other, rich world, poor world, historical debts, etc., etc. In Paris, both America and China took the lead in persuading other countries to sign up to these agreements. It's an incredible story over 6 years. It's one of the reasons why so many more people think that we are now actually going to be able to do this than would have been the case back in 2009 in Copenhagen. I'm trying to end on a cheerful note, not least because I know we are the only thing that stand between you and getting to that drink out there. So if I end on a suitably upbeat note, maybe Maitre D will let us go.
Yes.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Very good.
I think